We're back with another review here on Disney Dust, and this time around, it's for Kingdom Keepers, the book series by Ridley Pearson. Here's my non-spoiler review. The series is good for the nuggets of real information and sometimes history of Disney and its parks. So, being a true Disney fan, I knew I had to read this series. It started out really good. I remember being wowed by the first book. The whole idea of Disney villains coming to life at night, and how these group of kids, called the Kingdom Keepers, go to sleep to become avatar holograms of themselves to stop these villains. The idea itself, created by Ridley Pearson, the author, allows for many possibilities for Disney characters to interact within the same world, much like Once Upon a Time. But not only that, in our current world, which is very exciting. Also, the use of technology here and how it plays into the potential for twists and turns and interesting scenarios is very, very clever. However, I felt that Pearson was clumsy sometimes, at least in translating or making sense of how exactly the technology works, to the point that it seems to defy logic or contradicts itself. I finished these 12 books over many years and only recently read the last 5 of them within a short space of time. I guess my judgment of the series is also not consistent because my tastes would have changed over the years. However, I do remember enjoying the first few books especially. In terms of Disney characters, I have to say it was always thrilling to meet a character, but every time there was a scene with them, it always left me wanting more. And this was because none of the Disney characters are main characters. They appear very briefly, and they don't seem to embody the lovable qualities or characteristics that they have in the movies. Instead, Pearson paints a very stock and two-dimensional, pun intended, depiction of them that leaves very much to be desired. What was frustrating about reading this book was also that at points, the characters kept splitting up, and it was hard to keep track of what their tasks or goals were. It didn't help that they sometimes endangered their lives to follow leads that were based on weak assumptions. And after a while, most of these leads were annoying because it was oftentimes left by this older fictitious Imagineer named Wayne in the form of puzzles. And the reason was it had to be puzzles because he didn't want the villains to decode what he was telling the kids. Well, for me, I didn't understand why he couldn't just communicate more efficiently. I mean, the villains had no problems talking to each other. They didn't speak in code or leave puzzles for themselves to solve. I understand it's all part of creating a mystery and adventure for the readers to follow, but logically it wasn't substantiated enough. I have to give credit, though, for Pearson's novel, pun intended, approach for Book 7, where he created an app and invited readers to help him write the story, for half of the book at least. And that was where the story and logic was strong again, when Pearson remembers he's writing for an audience that needs to understand what is going on, especially when they are asked to help write. In the later part of the series, the book The Syndrome also stood out after many misses, and it was refreshing because he shifted writing from third person to first person, and the first person's perspective always changed between characters. And this was not part of the main 10 books, though. He had 2 that were mini adventures supporting the timeline of the 10 books, hence 12 books in total. As good as this book was, however, the flaw was that when I tried to put some of the events together with the understanding of the timeline, some of it just didn't make sense. I don't want to criticize without example, so I'll give one. Book 8 mentions that Amanda and Jess had met up and were in contact with Finn and gang prior to their, shall we say, absence, in the interest of not giving away too much. So if they were in touch, why were they so clueless in Book 7.5 as to what the Kingdom Keepers were up to? It does not make any sense. Other flaws include when one character had the ability to physicalize anything she drew up on a piece of paper, and after the first time she used the ability, she did not use it any further to the group's advantage. Why? Well, I don't know. Who knows? Again, that does not make sense. Also, if you looked at the big picture, the good Disney characters outnumber the Disney villains in the first place. If they just were to group together, they wouldn't even need the Kingdom Keepers. But we only see at most a bunch of Disney characters at a time. If characters can leave the parks and walk around, how is it some others also cannot? Another issue is that, aside from the fact that they split up and it's hard to keep track of them, they sometimes split up to stand guard for the other group that is, say, inside the building trying to accomplish a secret mission. But oftentimes the problem or danger is inside that building. So if they'd only group up, there would be a lot less trouble inside the building. And then there's also the issue when these kids are holograms. They actually can be hurt if they start to fear, which makes them start to become solid. To me, these kids are invincible because they're untouchable when clear holograms, and they're able to accomplish any physical tasks while being solid. So having these two options, why would it then take over 10 books to defeat these villains who don't even come close to having this technology or being able to tamper much with it? So then you start to question the abilities of the heroes you're supposedly supporting, and then in turn the writing. Books 8 to 10 was a bit of a reboot on the story, and to give Pearson more credit, it was nice that he explored the origins of how the Disney villains came to be, with a believable link to our current present world. It also gave context to another group that exists in the story called the Fairleys, and how they were linked to the plot. Kudos to Pearson for that. He actually kept the first 7 books going without even revealing these facts, or maybe he should have. However, it was very unbelievable how, after all that the Kingdom Keepers went through, it seemed everyone was against poor Finn, who was warning them about impending danger. Everyone just seemed to want to move on from being a Kingdom Keeper. It was truly unjustified. An interesting thing is that Walt Disney also appears in this story, and although this is a piece of fiction and really exciting, I wonder how this passed the marketing team in terms of how it represents the man himself, or when it describes some horrible things happening to the park in general. It could be painting the park in a bad light as much as it's fictitious. Well, maybe read it for yourself to decide. Anyway, by the end of it, after spending so much time with them, it was still very bittersweet to say goodbye to the characters. Pearson himself did say he isn't sure if the series would continue. I would say read it if you are a true Disney fan, but don't put that high on your priority list. That's all for Disney Does. I hope you subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And until the next review or the next episode, this is DisneyDwayne. Take care.